This is John Sperling, and on behalf of the ASCS Practice Management Committee, we'd like to welcome you to this webinar this evening. I'm very excited for this event. Dr. Nadi Hamid has organized a spectacular faculty to be able to share with us some of their insights on how to build and maintain a successful practice in a competitive market. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Hamid to be able to get us started this evening.
We do have a quick video from our sponsor, Smith & Nephew, here first. If I could just play that really shortly.
Perfect. That'd be great, Steve. Thank you.
At Smith & Nephew, we strive to put solutions in your hands that can allow your patients to live a life unlimited, and the shoulder space is no different. Here at Smith & Nephew, our focus is on providing you options throughout your patient's continuum of care with cutting-edge products like Regeniten, a bioinductive implant that redefines biologic healing for rotator cuff tendon growth.
And the new ATOS shoulder system starring the ATOS Metastem that allows for streamlined procedures, an elevated surgical experience, and efficiency by helping to simplify TSA and RSA. We are honored to support the ASCS Foundation, and it is our mission to continue to provide you with the most innovative solutions in the shoulder space to help restore your patient's ability to live their life unlimited.
Well, thanks so much, John and Steve, and thank you to the ASCS Practice Management Task Force for inviting us to be part of this webinar series. We got an interesting topic tonight. As I was putting my thoughts together for this topic, it reminded me that building a shoulder practice is tough. It doesn't really matter where you are. And our goals tonight is really just to give our members some practical tips and information from our experiences as panelists of all built practices, and things that you can take to a practice if you're starting your own practice or just finishing fellowship or moving locations, or if you just want to do some things to fine tune your own referrals in your practice. So hopefully you'll have some good tips that you can take and apply to your own practice after tonight's webinar. I'd like to introduce our panelists here. We have Dr. Charlie Jobin. Charlie is at Columbia University. He works with fellows and residents. He has multiple high-level academic appointments. Charlie is going to be able to give us his experiences working in the Mecca shoulder surgery in the U.S. And tell us what it was like building a practice with colleagues such as Dr. Bigliani, Dr. Levine, Dr. Flato, and countless other giants in our field. So it'll be interesting to hear Charlie's comments. Next, we have Vani Sebastian. Vani is in practice in the Palm Beach, Miami area. Vani's been super active and involved in the society throughout her career, has been very academic, and she is in a hotbed of shoulder pathology down there in southern Florida, but also a hotbed of shoulder specialists. So I'd be interested to see Vani's experiences, and I think they'll be a little bit different than Charlie's. Then we have Grant Garrigus. Grant is in practice in Chicago. Grant's a little different in that he had an established shoulder and elbow practice at Duke, and then decided to move, be closer to family. So he moved to Chicago, where he joined Midwest Orthopedics, affiliated with Rush. And so Grant has just recently been back to Chicago, started his practice, kind of restarting that whole process again, and picked a city with shoulder specialists around every corner. So it'd be good to hear Grant's comments as well. Again, I'll be kind of moderating. I'm Nadi Hamid. I'm in Charlotte, North Carolina, and all the panelists here, we're all, I would consider, mid-career shoulder and elbow specialists. So we're all been in practice for 11 to 16 years or so. All our disclosures available on the Academy website, but here's the disclaimer. So none of us are Dr. Neer. We don't have thousands of patients waiting to see us every day. We are all very much in the pursuit of building a practice. And so the things we'll talk about today will be the lessons we've learned, sometimes the easy way, sometimes the hard way of how to build a practice. And a lot of comments I may have tonight are really also observations of partners of mine that have highly successful practices and things I saw them do to build successful practices. So as we were kind of putting this together, we wanted to frame the discussion. I kind of pictured a new shoulder and elbow specialist, maybe somebody that Charlie Jobin just finished training, and they go out and practice, and they're moving to a new city, saturated market. You know, I thought there was 3 things they should keep in mind as they wanted to build their practice. The first is, how do you build your visibility? So who are you? People need to know you, who you are. They need to know what you look like. They need to know your face and connect it with your name. So the first thing you need to do is grow your visibility in a market. The second thing was to establish your niche. So what do you do? So what's your practice like? What kind of patients do you want to see? What is your level of expertise? So how do you establish your niche in an area? And the last is, how do you stand out in a sea of shoulder specialists? So the way I thought about that is, how well do you do it? So how well can you take care of problems? And so these are the 3 things that I think you should keep in mind when you're building a practice that people need to know about you. Who are you? What do you do? And how well do you do it? So we're going to kind of go through and dive into each of those. So how to build your visibility. Who are you? So let's just kind of start talking with our panelists here. You know, the first thing you kind of hear about as you enter a market is networking. So how do you network? What is networking? So let's start with Grant, maybe. Maybe Grant could tell us sort of what was his strategy with networking? What worked well for you as you sort of entered that Chicago area?
Yeah, so I've kind of done this twice in my career. So the first time when I was at Duke, I had a practice that it was part of a very large primary care network. And so when I started there, it was, hey, let me introduce you to all the, primary care doctors, primary care sports medicine, rheumatologists, all the potential referral sources. When I started at Rush, there's a much smaller group of primary care surgeons. So it's a very different thing. And there you have to really kind of get out there and get to know people. So I think a lot of wherever you go, whether it's urban or rural, there's going to be other people doing it or doing some kind of shoulders. Maybe they're doing it well, maybe they're not doing it well, maybe they're shoulder and elbow trained, maybe they're not. But you want to meet the neighbors, I think, is helpful. And then you also want to meet the referral sources. And that can take a little while to get to know the lay of the land, but you got to do it.
Great. Did you find it, I had some of my senior partners say, go eat dinner with all the rheumatologists in town, or, go meet with the physical therapists or the sports medicine primary care. Did you think there was sort of one referral flow pattern that was sort of important for you to make personal connections with?
They're all important, right? Everybody's a potential referral source, whether it's, so here in Illinois, it's a so-called direct access state, which means that patients can go see a therapist without a prescription. So physical therapists are a potential referral source here, and obviously we refer patients to them. So that's a very easy one because there's a 2-way street there. So a lot of physical therapists will want to interact with you. But really everybody's a potential referral source, right? It's you're coaching your kids' little league team, those people on the team, like you want them to know that you're part of the community. Hey, I'm new in town. I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I use shoulders. I'm your son's coach on this team, like, right? And then it's the primary care doctor, it's the primary care sports medicine, it's all those people, but it's literally everybody you interact with, Nadia. I mean, you said you want people to see your face, your name, but they also want to connect it to the fact that you're a shoulder specialist. So I think that's, just make that part of your introduction. Don't be shy. And I think, that's who you are. And that, I think you should really, you're not thinking about them as referral sources, but that's kind of your role in that new community that you're moving to. And I think it's important that people know that.
You touched on this a little bit about community. I kind of almost separated it a little bit, like networking within the healthcare system and then networking in your free time, right? Like in the community. Charlie, maybe tell us a little bit about your experience about community networking and how successful was that? I mean, community is different for everybody. Like some people are active in a church, some people at a gym, some people at their country club. But what do you think was successful for you?
Yeah, I think great points. I want to agree with Grant that really being proud of being a shoulder specialist and letting people know is important. And day one, your website needs to focus on that and not just be all inclusive, but definitely tell people what you want to do and let it be a self-fulfilling prophecy. But in terms of building community relationships and referral patterns, I used the schools that I was associated with and being available to the athletic directors and coaches and other parents, and all of a sudden it builds on itself. And the first couple months you're treating people you directly related with and or have relationships with through this community, and then all of a sudden you treat their moms or their dads or their kids, and it grows. So athletics was my sort of first start into this community. Second parts of the community were sort of like I guess it was more professional communities, but some of like the nursing facilities and some of the hospitals that were satellite hospitals in our organization had a lot of people who wanted to talk about sports or talk about golf or talk about tennis injuries. And it came back to that sort of country club lifestyle of like, how do I keep my shoulder healthy during the sports season? And what are some of your tips and tricks to avoiding injury? And it was real basic, but it got you out there and it got you established as the shoulder specialist.
Nana, can I also just maybe say one more thing that just to touch on what they both said and just to add, I think it's also dependent on the community and the environment. I think healthcare is a really changing sort of platform. And I moved from a Michigan to Florida. And in Michigan, there were big healthcare systems, a lot of employed physicians, as Grant pointed out. And then I moved to Florida, which is like the wild, wild west. And I think just knowing your environment really should strategize where you kind of try to start to really focus your connections. And I think the other thing that Charlie talked about that I think is really interesting is sort of kind of like in Florida, like the older population really wants to know about shoulder health and sort of taking it as a personal networking thing of sort of helping people with information, not necessarily what you would think of as traditional networking strategies. I don't know if it's giving a talk or, you get one guy who's at a golf club calling you and then they kind of want you to tell everybody. I think the other thing that Grant points out that I think is really important is that I think in today's healthcare, that personal relationship, if a primary care can text you, or if you can create some sort of personal connection, I find that sometimes that has been way more, I wouldn't say strategic, but a lot more fulfilling in terms of they will send you everything versus sort of kind of trying to go out and blanket everywhere.
Great point. Great point. When you start it with a group, guys, there's always sort of this marketing strategy that a marketing department will have. Have you found that to be successful? Was there anything in particular? When I thought back about my first couple of years in practice, I thought some of the best marketing, especially with healthcare networking, was exactly what I believe Charlie said was, giving a few talks here and there, giving talks to at a PT conference, giving talks to, the family practice attendings and residents at, their weekly conference. It was little things like that where you could kind of show who you are and then sort of what you plan on doing in town. Any comments, guys, about sort of group and hospital marketing? Anything in specific you would request if you were sort of doing it all over again?
Yeah, I'll go. I think so. Okay, so at my last institution at Duke, you weren't allowed to have a private website or anything like that. They wanted to keep all the marketing, through the university. And at my new kind of private practice in Chicago, it's very much you can market yourself and that's fine. So when I got here, the marketing people were like, you got to be on Instagram and Twitter and Facebook, and you have to set up all these things. And I was like, wow, okay, I don't have any of those. Okay, let me get on that. And I did that. And then I'm like, okay, where are my colleagues? And many of them were on there, but many of them were not, right? Which told me that not everyone's doing that, number one. I do think that's helpful, and I'm sure we'll touch on that later. But really, it's all local, right? It's all about the people. Like, your practice is going to succeed when that patient comes back. Hey, you did my other side, and I'm here for the other one. Or you took care of my wife, or you treated my friend that I know, or my coworker. That's when you're winning, right? That's when it becomes a chain reaction, and those happy patients are telling their 2, 3, 4 friends, and that's when things really take fire. So I think the key, not to say the marketing is not important, but the key is that you're treating each person with respect and getting a good result with each person. That's the marketing, because word of mouth is so much more important than seeing like a tweet or an X post or whatever we're calling them now. Like, in my opinion, I think, and even in a big city or a so-called competitive market or whatever, I think that's still the case.
I think that's the case, Grant, too. And really the proof is in the pudding, how you treat patients, and you got to have the right indications, and you've got to have good outcomes. But then people are going to doctor shop you in these busy markets, and they're going to want to see you online, and they're going to look at patient testimonials. They're going to want to, do their own background research and feel like they've chosen you and they've made that decision. And those patients, when they come and see you, they're like hook, line, and sinker. Like, you're my doctor because I chose you already. I've looked you up online. My friend referred you. And so I think beyond just taking great care of patients, you need to have that online presence that, seals the deal and vets you beyond just the patient experience when they come to see you in the office. And that's been my sort of experience in New York. I'm curious if you guys have the same experience in your practices.
Yeah, I think definitely a more competitive environment, people are more savvy. I think the only other thing too that you guys both pointed out too is Nadia, I would say if I asked my hospital to do something, would be to really help me sort of recruit reviews, because I think the Google reviews, the branding from patients, the more you can have that be personalized, because a lot of healthcare systems now just sort of brand the hospital or brand the system and not necessarily brand your talents. And so it doesn't become personalized. But when patients are searching someone, they search typically the surgeon. They want that personalized thing. So if I could have the hospital system really push out those Google reviews, seeking those out, recruiting that, I think that's one high yield that might be helpful.
That's great. Yeah, perfect. Great points. Okay, now that we've been visible, everybody knows who you are. Tell me, guys, about how to establish your niche. So what do you do? How to tastefully market yourself? And Bonnie, I'd like to ask you in particular, I think you've done a fantastic job with this. And tell me how you can do this. And I think, as Grant mentioned, every practice situation is a little different. Can you have your own website? Is it part of a group website? Is there policies on that? So you kind of have to look at that a little bit if you're in that situation. But for you, Bonnie, how did you kind of strategize how to market yourself, but do it in a really tasteful way?
I think, one is just obviously as a female orthopedist, I'm a little more unique. And so that was one strategy to sort of make it organic and maybe find something that sort of makes you unique. And then I think one thing is really finding a platform or a way that you find naturally suits you. Because I think the hardest part is when, like Grant says, everyone tells you to be on every platform and you're really trying to push everything out. It's hard, right? It takes time, it takes effort. And at least for me, I found that sort of various different ways made it a little bit more personal, and that could be more effective because it took less effort if it came more naturally. So I think that was one thing. And then I think the other thing is sort of finding that balance of making sure that your patients sort of have that personal connection with you, but also see your talents. And I think there's a lot of people who have done it really well, and I'm far the best at it. But I think making sure that I think what I learned is patients want you to know that you have your accolades, know that you have the expertise, but also want to see that you're a human too, like you have a personal side.
I would add also, when you start, you really want to do everything, and it's easy to sort of just shotgun approach it. And I found it more rewarding and more successful to sort of at least strategize. All right, I'm going to write a review article about something I want to take care of, like revision shoulder replacement. I want to be the guy who is available to do that. And so choosing sort of some of your academic tasks and pursuits that fit your career goals is important, and that establishes your niche in your practice.
Yeah, I
Great.
think I agree with both the points. So what Vonnie said was spot on about picking something that's natural to you, because otherwise it's going to just seem like a chore. And then what Charlie said is spot on. That's the nice thing about being a shoulder surgeon is, unlike say some of our knee colleagues that say, oh, I only do knee replacements, or I only do knee scopes, or one or the other. I mean, it's very easy to say, send me all your shoulders, non-op, operative, arthroscopic, open. Like if you got a shoulder problem, come see me. Now, obviously, as you go on, you're going to get some patients that are cervicogenic pain, right? And you're going to get a bunch of non-op stuff. And that's fine. Like, because you want to make it easy for these referral sources. They're not the shoulder experts, right? It's not up to them to decide, what you're seeing or what's not, but you want to make it easy for them, right? And so for me, it's been very easy to just say, hey, you got a shoulder problem, send it to me. And again, I think then you can decide amongst that what you want to treat and what you want to, not treat. But I think it's much the easier you make it to your referral sources, the better. I had a partner that was like, I only treat this one very specific condition, and he was great at it, but it was very hard to build a practice if you're extremely specific. And that's a nice thing about being an ASCS physician, is that we have that breadth and depth.
I would say one other thing. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead, Bonnie.
Well, I was just gonna say one other thing. I think when you're younger and you're trying to build it, you train amongst these people that are high volume, doing exactly what they want and love, and you sort of want, and when you get out, you sort of aspire to do that. I think sometimes you forget like what the practice needs, what the market needs. So like, for example, I have, 5 really high volume, well-known guys that are in my community, and including my senior partner, right? So I joined Dr. Routman, and Howard is a very well established, been here much longer. And so, I started filling maybe a little bit of the gaps on some of the things that he didn't love doing. And I think that slowly, organically kind of just, you can always tailor it differently. But I think sometimes, being strategic about that, you don't have to be so much that you limit yourself, but then your opportunity to build that much quicker exists.
Yep. Grant made a subtle point too that I thought was really outstanding. He said, if you see something that's non-operative, that's still and that is basically how you build a practice. You make connections with patients, and so every time you see a patient that you look at the chart and it's tennis elbow or it's non-operative shoulder condition, you should, my advice to you would be use that as an opportunity to build your practice by making another connection out in the community, and that will be a great referral source. If you spend time with that patient and they appreciate what you did for them, even though you didn't probably do much, especially if it's like a tennis elbow, but they like you, they're going to tell all their friends about you. Grant, you made a comment about, getting on board with web, social media presence. Tell us, do you feel like that was impactful with building your practice? Was it more to make connections with colleagues, or do you feel like that was helpful for actually patient-facing marketing as well?
I think so. I have found that what Charlie said is very much the case, is that the word of mouth is kind of the hook that sort of gets people turned towards you, but then they're going to want to research you, look you up. And so you have to have, if they hear somebody, well, let's say they don't know the person very well. Let's say, hey, I heard you had shoulder pain. I literally have patients come in that were talking about the shoulder in a bar, and someone said, hey, you should see Dr. G, or at like a sports game. They don't know those people, right? And so the first thing you're going to do is look you up, your website, your social media presence. So I think the social media for me is important because it drives people to the website, and it's important for some of that, like search engine optimization, things like YouTube, et cetera, and those videos. And then the website itself is where, as Charlie said, you're going to be able to put all your bona fides out there of your training and what you've done and what your practice philosophy is, and what kind of conditions you treat, and your patient testimonials, and kind of all those things are going to be there that kind of back up. So I think it starts with word of mouth, but then you have to have the web presence. And obviously you're depending on your situation, as you said, your job may insist on doing that for you. And, it's nice to have a good relationship with those people and kind of work with them on that website if they don't let you have your own personal one. If they let you have your own personal website, I would take that opportunity. There's no reason you can't have two, one through your job and one on your own, unless it's prohibited by your workplace.
Grant, I think that's a great point, and a lot of jobs and a lot of places want to have you online, and they'll say they do stuff, but honestly, it's going to come down to sort of some just knuckle grease to get it done yourself, and ask patients for testimonials, have your staff ask patients for testimonials, get Google reviews like Vani said, and just make it part of your day, an active task of asking happy patients to share their story. And a lot of people want to share their story, just like they want to donate to the foundation or help out, and you don't get it unless you ask, and you have to ask, and some patients won't tell you unless you ask. So just being proactive about it right from the start is what you should do, and that's how I feel.
So what Charlie just said about the reviews is key. Google reviews is so important, and some of my colleagues who are great surgeons, they'll have like just little comment cards. Oh yeah, grab a review, and if you want to leave it, great. And if not, no way. That is not the right way to do it, in my opinion. Like, if you have a patient who's happy, you as the physician should hand them this card, say, hey, I really appreciate you being my patient. I'm glad you feel like we had something special to offer. We would love more patients like you. Please, if you move to do so, share your story. We really enjoyed having you as a patient. Like that. I mean, because they're looking for a way to thank you, in that moment. But you've gotten a successful outcome. It's such a small thing for them. Some people aren't as tech savvy and they may not do it, and that's fine. But I think you as the physician should hand them that and let them know that they're doing you a favor. They actually appreciate that.
That's a great point, Grant. That's a great point. And so you hand them a card basically that has the sort of the Google review sort of prompt for them to go on and do that for you.
When I started, I would just say, can you just Google my name? I'm the only Grant Gerges around here. And then it'll say, there's a little button that says leave a review. And I would like walk them through it. And then I got a little savvier. We have like a little QR code thing that it just takes them right to it on their phone. And after the pandemic with all the QR menus, people are pretty savvy with that. But yeah, I mean, you can make it complicated or not complicated, but I think the key is that, if you have a really happy patient, just take a moment and ask them, hey, if you feel moved to do so, it would really mean a lot to me.
Great. Charlie, I wanted to ask you, as a shoulder and elbow specialist, there's probably some expectations that you should be qualified to do sort of the cutting edge, higher complexity stuff. What advice would you give to our members about technology, techniques? If you're starting practice and you want to be the shoulder and elbow expert, do you need to be able to tell everyone, hey, I do arthroscopic lateral-j's? How important do you think that is for people trying to show their niche?
I think in a competitive market, you want to start off by sort of not going out on the edges of sort of newer technology. I think you got to stay within your lane, honestly, in the beginning, and have the right indication and do the right surgery and have great patient outcomes. There's a lot of incentive to be the first to do something, or the first robotic that, or use a new technology, but a lot of it's unproven. And at least my advice from my mentors and sponsors when I was starting was to be careful not to be way out on the edge, because people talk and therapists talk and patients talk. And so I think at least staying in the sort of center of the lane in the beginning was what I found to be helpful. And then as you built that reputation, then you could start to branch out. But I totally see the attractiveness of marketing a new technology as being the expert who can do it. I don't know.
Great.
Maybe Vani has a different opinion.
Vani, any comments?
No, I think, you have to have developed some skill set, right? So I don't think with anything, something that you're not comfortable, but at the same time, Grant does an arthroscopic lateral J and I don't. And I mean, I think that they're in a competitive market, at least down in South Florida, technology. I mean, if you look at the amount of patients that come for a robotic hip and knee, I mean, I think there is a draw, and it just is sort of dependent on what that technology is. I think in our society right now, technology is kind of a hot topic. Um, but I don't think that it should alter what you think in terms of your clinical decision making and your outcomes. If it's an added benefit for some ability to do that, I think there is some advantageous part of that in a competitive market. However, I think it can become easily backfire.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I wouldn't use technologies just for technology's sake. You know, it's about treating the patients like they're your family member or your neighbor or whatever. And can you get them from a state of ill health to a state of health, right? And if the technology or some technique helps you do that, you know, great. If it's just, you know, fluff, then that's not something that I'd be interested in. But I do think that you know, it is important, you know, just to know, just to stay current, right? So go to the national meetings. Right? Obviously, I don't. It's a variety of people that are on this webinar, but kind of staying current with that. I think also the community of shoulder surgeons is very rich. So if there's something you want to learn, something you hear about, you know, I've taken the opportunity to call people. Hey, I want to learn this technique you're doing. How can I come visit you? And you'll find that if those new people are willing to teach those new techniques, if you think those will help your patients. So, you know, I think there's a lot here. The other thing about kind of ramping up and trying new things, you know, if you're new in practice, I mean, it's different than moving to a new market, but if you're right out of fellowship, you want to get busy, right? But it should not happen day one. You don't want your first day in the OR like stacked with a million difficult cases. You know, if your first couple cases that come in are revisions and you haven't even done a primary, slow play them. You know, get a little more PT, maybe an EMG, like get some more studies. Don't stack up the hard cases, because exactly, I think it was Charlie that said, you know, people talk, and you want to be ahead of schedule. You want to have a kind of a nice ease into your career over those first sort of weeks in practice, because that'll really build that reputation locally amongst your colleagues.
Yeah, I agree,
I want
Grant.
to add one
One thing
other.
is if technology super slows you down or adds a lot of futz factor, I mean, it's amazing. You're part of your PR or your marketing is the people you work with. And if they all know that is, and they see other surgeons, and it puts you at a competitive disadvantage. Sorry, Charlie, go ahead.
No, I agree. I totally agree. People talk within the healthcare system. I want to say another thing. A lot of the newer fellows or people who are recently trained might actually be more well versed in the techniques that are newer than some of their senior partners. And so, I'm not saying not to do no new technology, but you may come out of fellowship 3 years ago and be better trained in arthroscopic distal tibial allograft or remplissage than a lot of your senior partners. And so, you may be actually an asset in teaching your colleagues, and you may be the most expert in your community. So just because you're newer in practice doesn't mean you're not the best trained and have the most experience doing some of the newer technologies. So I'm not saying don't do nothing, but be careful to stay within your lane of proper indications, which I think everyone is highlighting today.
That's a good point, Charlie, too. Leveraging your skill set too, and being able to establish relationships with some of your partners or colleagues in town that may actually want to gain some of those skills, but don't want to go out of town to do it. That's a great point too. I had a partner once tell me, don't ever be the first or the last person to do anything, you know, as it relates to technology. So I think that's good advice. You don't want to be a dinosaur, but I certainly don't want to be the first one trying it. And I don't think your patient would want to know that they're the first one you're doing it either. So I think good advice there on innovation. Let's see here. Slides are not, there we go. All right. We've kind of touched on this a little bit already. This is kind of the crux of it, right? How to stand out in a sea of shoulder specialists. And I interpret that as, you know, how well do you do what you do? And all three of our panelists already said this and sent this message home already, but your biggest and best referral source is and will always be your own patients, right? And so how do you get your patients to advocate for you? How do you get them to market for you? You know, those are the things you want to consider. And I think the number one, the no-brainer is you give them a good outcome. You give them a good outcome, they're going to love you. But the other thing is, and I put it, making a personal connection with patients, right? And so in a busy shoulder practice, you can get great outcomes, but sometimes it's hard to keep that personal relationship where patient may remember your name, but they wouldn't recognize you if they saw you at a restaurant. So how do you kind of balance both of those two things? Let's start with you, Vani. So do you do anything, you know, in your practice to kind of make patients feel like they're in a concierge practice or that they're the only patient you got?
Well, I think couple tips. I remember Grant and I trained with a guy, and he used to sort of give a talk on this as we were senior residents. He said sort of, you know, calling your patients, you know, your surgical patients, whether it's the night of, the next day, sort of that personal, not just the family members, but the patients to check on them is, I think, a nice thing that sort of I've found patients really appreciate. I think also sort of kind of specifically remembering some of the stuff, whether they're, we get a lot of seasonal people, for example, and you know, there are plans to leave to go up north for the summer and sort of really kind of remembering a few things and or tailoring your rehab and saying, you know, let me just send you with your rehab when you go up to Philly for the summer. And so I think just trying to do that. The other thing is sort of connecting them with other people to make sure that they have a good outcome, whether they're local or not, going the extra effort for that sort of, I think, have been personal things that I feel that patients have appreciated.
Grant?
I think Fonnie makes great points. The other additional one would be, I mean, you know, our field as physicians, one of the really cool things is we see a total cross section of society, right? Our friends that are, you know, work in a certain industry, they may not see that broad swath of people, from, you know, the businessman to the athlete to the iron worker to the, you know, to the young people, old people, et cetera. So I like to get to know something about them, like personally. Hey, what do they like to do? And that comes up naturally, right? As a shoulder surgeon, I always ask about their work and their hobbies, you know, how they stay fit, what keeps them going. And that's relevant to me in terms of their treatment, but also it's a great conversation point. And yeah, maybe it slows down your clinic a little bit to talk about their new grandchild or how they like to play pickleball or whatever, but it's more fun for me in clinic to have kind of those more meaningful conversations. And I think the patients appreciate it, especially if you remember it when they come back. Hey, how'd that, I know you're going to do that golf tournament. How'd that end up? Right. I mean, that stuff really builds a real bond. And I think that's important. And frankly, it's more fun for me as the clinician.
Great point. You know, I tend to call my patients the night before surgery and just kind of chit chat with them, just like Grant said, and kind of ease a little bit of their stress going into it, and just kind of lay out what the day will be like for them. I found that to be really a nice way of connecting with patients, and then when they see the next day, they already kind of feel welcome. They feel kind of at ease. You know, and there's different ways to do it. A lot of people actually have a long commute, so they'll call patients after their surgery on their way home. They'll call their patients that had surgery that day. There's different ways to do it. You just kind of have to think about it. But I agree with Vonnie. I think that phone call directly to the patient during some point in that perioperative period can be a really nice touch. So just definitely keep that in mind.
On a similar note,
yes,
sorry,
please.
I was just gonna say a similar note would be like rounding, right? I mean, Bonnie and I were in the same residency, very old school, where you round on your patients every day. Like, I mean, if my patient in the hospital on Saturday, I go in and see them. And, you know, a lot of people, hey, there's PAs, there's hospitalists, maybe you don't need to go in and see them. Patients really appreciate that FaceTime with their doctor, and they know that their doctor's thinking about them. I think that's important for medical care, but I think patients really appreciate that one-on-one time. They really want to know that you value them. And I think the way you show that is with your time.
Great. We touched on online rating already. Let's talk a little bit about referring partners, guys, and how do you get those referrals? You know, I'm in a group of 150 orthopedic surgeons, and if you looked on our website, I think it's about 40 of them say that they're shoulder specializing. So 40. So I mean, and a lot of them are really good at it. A lot of them didn't do shoulder and elbow fellowships, but you know, they want shoulder patients. They want to have shoulder as a large part of their practice. So how do we get patients like that to refer to us? So how do you get partners to refer to you? Grant, how do you get your partners in Chicago to refer patients to you?
Well, I mean, do you want them to refer those to you? Because the ones they're going to send you are going to be the ones with sinus tracts and whatnot. But in all seriousness, I think, let me give you an example. So I have two sort of locations that I go to for clinics. So one, I'm around my other partners. They all practice in the same building. It's kind of at our main hub. And the other one, I'm the only shoulder doctor there. So my practice is very different in the two places. My niche, as you said earlier. So at the one where I'm with all the other doctors, my surgical yield is very high, but it's surgeries that are like kind of tougher, maybe don't pay as well, you know, a lot of medical comorbidities, like just a lot of stuff. But and it's typically because my other partners have sort of passed on it or refer them to me, which is fine. That's my role, and I really appreciate those referrals. At my other location, where I'm the only shoulder doctor at that kind of satellite facility, you know, it's a lot of non-op stuff and things that I have to work up. But then once they get to surgery, they're kind of straightforward, you know, like a 2-centimeter cuff tear and kind of nice little cases. So I would recommend that you have kind of both facets. You have like the part of your practice where you're getting the referrals from your partners. Those tend to be harder, but if you just do that, you'll feel it's exhausting, right? And then you have the other part of your practice where you're kind of building, where you're the guy or you're the girl in that location. So I had that at my last job. I have that here, and I think that's a good fit to avoid kind of burnout and keep some balance.
I'd say one
Charlie, how
thing
about you?
too, Natty, in a competitive market is you got to be willing to travel. I definitely think that like having multiple sites tends to be a very common thing in a competitive market, whether it's, you know, outlying or what, but you know, staying in a hub in a competitive market's hard.
Yeah,
Yeah, when you start, you really want to say yes a lot and really say
exactly.
no very infrequently to
Charlie, how do you get
referrals.
those
And
folks
even
at
if it's
Columbia?
yeah, I mean, you want to say yes almost all the time and no never, so that you're the available guy. And if you say no to a referring partner or a referring specialist, that might close the door for a long time. So even if it's the acute cervical radiculopathy that you're willing to see in your office and get them steroids, like you're going to help that person, you're going to help that primary care doctor or referring partner, you know, help this patient. So saying yes a lot in the beginning is critical. And you know, it does risk burnout, like Grant mentioned, if you're just taking care of infected shoulder replacements or sinus tracts. But you know what? Sometimes they're the most appreciative patients because you're taking them on and helping them and realizing they have a really bad problem. So yeah, my strategy in the beginning definitely was saying yes all the time and being the person always available, with a smile, and absolutely send me that disaster train wreck and we're going to help them.
Such a good point, Charlie. You know, the way I think about it in my head is I feel like if I said no to somebody 2 times, definitely 3, I'm never going to get a referral from them again. So you may be able to get away with 1 no for whatever reason, but I would really try and do whatever I can to not say no twice in a row to anyone sending me a patient. I would bend over backwards because I don't feel personally like I'm going to continue to get referrals if I say no twice in a row. So just keep that in mind. Charlie's right. You know, saying no is you want to say yes. So you want to say yes. You want to take the hard stuff. You want to be available. That's you're answering calls on the weekend sometimes just to help people out. You know, you do them a favor that you know you will start to see more referrals from not only them, but you'll get it from maybe even their family members, other people in that office probably. You know, I would tell you too, be patient with some of your referring partners. I had a guy send me like 5 dislocated infected reverses in a row, and I thought I'd never get a good patient from him. And then he sent me his wife, who had a rotator cuff tear, and I operated on 2 of his children with instability of the shoulder. Like, then he started sending me like his patients at like his next door neighbor. And so, if you hang in there with referring partners and don't burn bridges, it can really blossom to be a good referral source. Just, you got to be patient with them sometimes. Well, let's see here. Check the chat. I have a couple questions here. I just wanted to ask you guys.
Hey, Marty, can I
yeah.
make one comment before you go on?
Yeah.
So the other thing is just along the lines of never saying no. Like, you'll get these referrals like, all right, this patient is I mean, I've gotten them, right? We've all gotten them. They're on dialysis and they have an LVAD and they have shoulder arthritis. And you're thinking, this is not a surgical, why are they sending it to me? But you got to take yourself back and say, hey, this referring source, they just don't know what to do. They're not necessarily saying you have to do surgery on them, right? A lot of these people that we think are bad referrals are just not surgical candidates. That's fine. You meet them, you talk to them about their diagnosis, about the treatment options, and surgery may not be in the cards for that person, and that's okay. Just because they're not a surgical candidate doesn't mean it's a bad referral. As somebody said earlier, it's an opportunity to create something new. So a lot of those medical train wrecks, you meet them, you tell them, hey, you're not a surgical candidate, and they move on. And it's not there's no such thing as a bad referral.
I think the other thing is, when you're young, is you want to think that you can take on everything. And, you don't ever want to say no. We're taught that very well and skilled. And sometimes you do need to know your limits. I think when you're early in practice, taking on something that could end up really going catastrophically bad, or maybe it's beyond, your first 5 cases or your first whatever cases, taking on the hardest of the hard it can be actually tough as a precedent. So maybe before getting your system straight, getting, your easy reverse in, getting your sets ready to go, just making sure it's within your limitations. I mean, we all want to be heroes, but we don't always necessarily have to be, And I think just knowing that in your practice early is important, or ask for help if you need it. But I think
phone a friend.
Yeah.
I've operated with my colleagues multiple times on cases together, even though we have tons of experience, but you both learn from it. You treat the patient better, and you got 2 brains thinking on this problem instead of one. So operating with a colleague or operating with another coworker is definitely worth it. I don't know. Have you guys ever operated with a senior partner on a tough case just to have another set of hands and fresh ideas and prevention of the disaster?
Absolutely. I just did one last week. I had my first acute lat repair. I had never done one in practice, and so I did one with one of my good friends and colleagues, and it was a blast. And it was fun to do. We both learned a ton, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I've been in practice for 12 years, and I asked him to do it with me, and I thought it was the right move. And there's definitely opportunities for that. I've never had a partner, and I've never said no, and I've never had a partner actually give any flack to any of us. Whoever did that in our group asked for help. And I had for a couple years I was doing a new total elbow system, and one of the designers of the system was in our group, and so I would scrub my total elbows with him, so he can kind of teach me some of the nuances of it. So yeah, absolutely. And I think that's great advice to our members, starting off. If you feel a little bit uncomfortable about a case, get one of your partners to give you a hand. They'll give you a lot more confidence. Okay, we're running a little low on time, but I wanted to kind of go through the panel here. Maybe just some take-home points. We'll go down the line, starting with Vani. Just maybe two kind of take-home points you would give our members an audience here about starting a press for you.
I guess couple things I might say when having moved is don't forget the simple stuff. Sort of as Grant says, stay local, be present, and then be a presence online to back it up. I think definitely the simple stuff of reaching out, you know, I asked everyone in South Florida. I actually called a bunch of surgeons and said, what has been your best referral source? How have you built your practice? For some of my other partners, and sort of, I think the idea of like rheumatologists and simple referrals from outside specialties and your therapist, and then asking them, you know, saying, who'd you go see? What groups are there? Understanding the landscape and taking time to do that early on, I think is really productive in building your practice. And then I think the only other thing I would say is sort of trying to distinguish yourself. I mean, it's a competitive market in South Florida, and maybe it's okay that I don't do every single one of the reverses that are simple, but I'm willing to do trauma, or I'm willing to say that I'm going to treat a little bit more of the older age sports people. It's sort of picking your battles, and your market might be a strategic way of going.
Great. How about Grant?
Yeah, so I think we've covered a lot of ground here. Nadia, I think appreciate you moderating this and inviting me. I think one thing I haven't brought up would be, like, you have to have patience, right? So it's building your practice. It takes time to build it, right? Rome wasn't built in a day. And we talk about in a competitive market. I mean, really every market is kind of competitive, right? I mean, you know, maybe you're in a situation where you're in like an HMO closed network and you're just being fed stuff. I mean, so maybe the system might be not competitive just because of the way it's set up. But pretty much if you go to some town and you think you're going to be God's gift to shoulder surgery there, someone's already treating those patients, right? There's not a bunch of people walking around like this waiting for a shoulder doctor to come along, right? So, you know, just respect that, understand that, and understand that you're going to start and you're going to do a good job and you're grow and grow and grow and grow. And you're going to look back in 5 years and you're going to have a very successful practice. But just, I think patience is key, and just doing the right thing over a long period of time, it's going to pay off. Charlie, over to you.
Yeah, so I totally agree with you guys, and great points, Vonnie. And I think Bill Levine instilled in me the 3 A's, and so building your practice, which are availability. You got to be able to just answer the phone, get the text message, answer the email, be available to take on a case or a consult or a referral. Be affable, so do it with a smile and be friendly, and finally is able, and they're in that order. And your ability to do the surgery is the least important to building your practice. It's more your availability and then affability. And so sort of just remembering those 3 and living by them is going to be your North Star to keep yourself on the right track. And then number 2 for me was really just keeping really strict indications, choosing the right patients to do the right surgery, and they're going to do great. It's a magic recipe. And when you start veering off of those indications, you can start to get in the weeds. So building a practice and staying true to indications is critical. Those are my 2.
Well, fantastic. Thanks so much to Vonnie, Grant, Charlie. Great job. I hope this was helpful to our audience, our members. Hopefully this will give you some things you can consider in your own practice. Thanks so much for John and Steve for putting it together, and the SES Practice Management Task Force. John, I'll turn it back over to you.
Perfect, Natty. What a terrific webinar this evening. I learned a lot from each of you. And I think the wonderful aspect of this is being recorded, so we'll be able to share this with the other ASCS members. But again, really appreciate everyone's time this evening and insights into building a practice in a competitive market. And with that, thank our faculty members this evening, and have a wonderful evening. Good night.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks very much.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.